guys, it's Sarah, and today is BookList Thursday. This is a video series I do with my friend Lindsay over at Lindsay's Little Library. And every Thursday we bring you some sort of list or book topic that we feel like talking about for the week. And this week we are going to talk about just some random recommendations. Now, full disclosure, these are going to be very popular books. The reason I'm doing this is because these are books that I would recommend constantly when I was working at Barnes & Noble as a bookseller. These are kind of some of my go-tos, because when people were coming in and looking for recommendations, it's because they weren't super widely read, or they don't read very often, but they were kind of in the mood to read and in the mood to, check out something different and new. And so these were the ones that, if someone came in looking for a mystery thriller, this was like my number one that I would recommend. And if they hadn't read it yet, this is what I would recommend to them, and, so on. So these are more popular choices, but they are definitely books that if you have not read them yet, I highly recommend reading them because they are some of my favorites. So I'm going to go a little bit by genre in that. So we'll just go ahead and start with the mystery thrillers, and that is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This is one of my top thriller books of all time. I absolutely love this book so much. And it's thrilling, definitely. And it's twisty, definitely, but there's also just extra levels because it has a lot to do with psychology, and sometimes that can be the scariest part. And then you definitely have, a person who is choosing to be silent, and that all the obstacles that come with that, trying to solve a case and do all that stuff when you have someone who literally will not talk about it. And it was fantastic. I loved it. Okay, we're going to do sci-fi fantasy, so I'm going to have actually two books for this. So when people come in looking for a good science fiction, I always recommend Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. That is because this one is very approachable for people who don't even normally read sci-fi. They have still read this book and absolutely loved it. And I always recommend the audiobook too as well, but I will put the book in people's hands if I can. But I love Andy Weir's writing, and I love that it's science, but it's not bogged down science. I wasn't getting lost in it. I was thoroughly enjoying it the entire time that I was reading it. And his characters are fantastic, and his humor is so on my level that I just really, really enjoy his books, and I laugh my way through them. So Project Hail Mary has been my number one sci-fi recommendation. And for fantasy recommendations, I always recommend Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, especially for people who are kind of newer to the genre. I recommend that one. And that is because this is an epic high fantasy. It's not super long. And the way that he writes it is very approachable. It is a really great way for people who don't normally read fantasy to get into it and to understand it. The way that he writes just makes everything click in your head. You can easily picture what's happening. The magic system makes sense because of the way that he writes it, and you can just easily picture what is happening. And it's just in the little details of him and his writing, and the way that he does his storytelling is fantastic. All right, now we'll go with some young adult recommendations that I give out all the time. We'll do a contemporary, and we will do a science fiction fantasy. For contemporary, I have been really recommending The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes a lot lately. And the reason I've been recommending that one is because it is kind of like a mystery almost, and it involves games and trying to figure things out. And there's a lot at stake. It's high stakes. And it was really kind of thrilling. I really liked that book a lot. I have not continued on with the series yet, but I do plan to. I do own all of them. But the first book just really kind of drew me in, and I really enjoyed my reading of that one. And then for sci-fi fantasy, I usually go with Cinder by Marissa Meyer. And that is because you're reading a retelling of a very familiar story, which is Cinderella. But it's told in such a unique way that you can see the influences, but it's not Cinderella. It feels very different, but you can definitely see the influences. It's also a good recommendation for people who are looking for books for their kids, who want something a little bit more mature, but not anything graphic. This is a clean book. So that's a good one too. And we get a lot of parents coming and looking for stuff for their teens, but they don't want them to have like graphic violence or graphic, sexual scenes or anything like that. This is a wonderful recommendation for that. because there isn't that kind of stuff in there. There's a little bit of violence, but it's nothing gratuitous. And there's a romance in it, but there's nothing open door at all about that. So that's a high recommendation that I have recommended to quite a few people. Okay, and then we'll go with a fiction book. And my number one recommendation is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. I love this book so much. It's not always picked up by people when I recommend it, just because, I'm like, well, how do you feel about octopus? And some people are like, and then some people are like, oh, yes. So, but octopus have been very trendy in books lately. And they're kind of trendy all over the place. It's kind of funny, but there's a lot of nonfiction about octopus right now. And there's some documentaries out and everything. And then they have become the subjects of some fiction books as well. And seriously, Remarkably Bright Creatures is fantastic for this, because Marcellus is such a great character, and he is a character, and you are in his head. You get a perspective from the octopus, you guys, and it is life-giving. It is so, so, so good. This is another one I listened to on audio, and the narration was perfect for him. And it's definitely one of my number one recommendations, and just to kind of feel out how people feel about it. Some people are interested, some people aren't, and that's fine. So if I have someone who's not interested in that, another big one for me has been The Women by Kristen Hanna, because that's been my favorite book so far of 2024. And it is, man, this book. So it is historical fiction, and is set around the Vietnam War, which usually when you hear about historical fiction books, so many of them are set in World War II. So this is a different time frame, which I really like. And just the way that she writes puts you right in the middle of everything. And you really, really, truly feel like you're there, like you're transported there, just the way that she writes these scenes. And it was phenomenal. So, that's been a big one too. A lot of people have been coming in just anyway, looking for that book when it came out. But if people hadn't read it or hadn't read any Kristen Hanna, I usually recommend The Nightingale over this one. But if they've already read The Nightingale, then I hand them this one. I'm like, okay, we'll read her newest one, because it's phenomenal too. So yeah. Okay, so those are some of the recommendations that I have been giving to people when they're coming in looking for something. Again, they're all very popular books. I'm sure you've probably heard of all of them already, but if you haven't, or you haven't read any of them, these are ones that I highly, highly recommend. They've been some of my favorite reads ever. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you guys again soon. Make sure you check out Lindsay and see which books that she's just randomly recommending. And we'll see you guys later. Have a great day. Bye.